Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Mastering Strategic Alignment. I am Dr. Mario Wallace, and today we have a lot of information to share with you. A whole lot of information. So, most of the presentation, the participants can give feedback through the chat. There will be maybe two opportunities to actually raise your hand and talk and respond to some information that's being presented. But further ado, other people will be rolling into the webinar as we kick it off. But let me let Dr. Abby Adeleki give us the ground rules for the webinar.
Yes, so good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining Dr. Mario on this webinar, very engaging webinar it's going to be. Just a few ground rules. Please, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone because he's also recording this event so that other people can participate in the near future. Also, we may not all agree on certain things he says or does not say, so please, we want us all to be respectful of each other. And as Dr. Mario said, please leave your comments in the chat so that we can come back to it and talk through those questions or concerns or comments or feedback that you have. And during the open discussion, please, if you would use the button on my screen, it's at the bottom to raise your hands. And most importantly, let's make it an engaging event. So in order to make it an engaging event, what team are you on? Are you Team Muffin or are you Team Scone? It's Saturday morning here, so are you Team Muffin or are you Team Scone? I can tell you, I'm Team Scone, and that's the conversation for another day. But what are you? If you want to put that in the chat, that's great. Which team you're on? I like my scone with coffee. Yeah, I'm seeing it, Muffin. The next question would have asked is, do you like it warmed or do you like it cold out of the fridge? I like my muffin warm, but not too warm, not warm where it's soggy. So, yeah, so over to you, Dr. Mario.
I'm let a couple more people respond. I just let two more people into the webinar.
Yeah, and Deirdre likes the warm scone with cheese. I never tried it with cheese. I've tried it with a little bit of butter and a little bit of jam, but never with cheese. But I like my scone. My heritage is British, so I like my scone and I like my coffee. Yeah. So.
Okay, so let's get into it. So I'm Dr. Mario Wallace with All Things Strategic. I have over 20 years of small business consulting, 11 years of healthcare consulting in the specialist strategy management. I've published several books on strategy management, and that is my seminal book based on research is Strategy Spelled Adam. That book actually takes you through all the steps of strategy management, from analyzing the market all the way to strategy review. And it also gives you a scope of work on how you do it step by step. Then we have The Unstoppable Leader. It's a book about process improvement, the operations within an organization. How do you find cost saving doing lean concepts within your organization? And lastly, the executive performance journal, and I would share that journal mostly in this actual webinar. It's a workbook that executives can use to keep an eye on strategy as it's being executed and developed along the way. And it's really for busy leaders who like to keep a pulse on what's happening with the strategy management process. So today we have 3 learning objectives. One is to explain the purpose of strategic alignment. The second is to describe the 10 points of strategic alignment. And the third is to articulate the method of strategic alignment. So the whole premise is, what is strategic alignment? And with that said, I want to let Dr. Tyson Grayson explain what is just alignment in general. And he's going to explain it from a universe perspective.
But you would only notice that over hundreds and in most cases thousands of years. So you don't live long enough to actually see stars move anywhere in the sky. So the planets will move. Maybe you want to say the planets are in alignment. But then, what do you mean by that? Does that mean the planets are sort of in line? The planets are always in a line. They orbit in the plane of the solar system. And we are in the plane of the solar system. You look up where you're going to find a planet, it's going to be in this line that is the plane of the solar system. So the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all of them, if you ever look for them, they will be in a line. So this notion that, oh, I saw a planetary alignment and you want to think it's special? No, there's nothing special about it at all. Chances are, if you think something unusual is happening in the universe and it's happening while you're alive, and the universe has been around for 13 billion years, you should rethink the speciality of what it is you're looking at.
Okay. I want to ask a question. As we look at this actual image of the universe, how does this relate to strategic alignment? What do you see here, and how does it relate and transfer to how an organization should be aligned? And what are we seeing taking place here? Do we see systems? Do we see processes? What do we see? This is an opportunity for you to actually talk as I get and take this concept and trim it down to organizational alignment. So if we look at this image, how does that reflect to us? What do we see? And do we see a correlation between an alignment of planets in the universe and what it looks like for alignment in an organization? And what is the importance of this alignment?
So we have a response in the chat. Julian says order.
Order, exactly, Julian. How you doing, Julian?
Doing great, Mario. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me say something about this image here. So an alignment in an organization is alignment of business units. And we see the planets, we can think of the planets as business units that has some type of perfect alignment. Within the business unit, there are systems that has to take place. Competitive advantage lives within the business unit, not at the corporate level. So strategy is developed at the business unit level to compete against rivalries in the industry. But when it comes to the corporate strategy, it's the key components of the business unit strategy that lives within the corporate strategy that gives us a strategic direction for the corporation. But the competitiveness lives within the business unit. So when you look at this image, each planet has its own dynamics. Each planet has its own systems, right? Each planet has its own processes. It's the same as within organization. Each organization, and especially within its business unit, has its systems, its processes, its technologies, its people, right? Its procedures and so forth. So strategic alignment, the reason I'm showing an analogy between the planets alignment and organizational alignment because the universe gives us a perfect union of what it looks like. And if the universe see alignment is something that's critical to species on planets, then we need to really consider how critical is alignment for our organizations as far as when it comes to resources, because every planet plays a role in the universe, as well as every part of a business unit within the organization plays a role within the organization. So at a high level, strategic alignment ensures that goals and plans of each operational and support functions are aligned to the corporate strategic plan, as well as this requires cascading the strategic agenda throughout an organization and establishing accountability reporting through results form to ensure execution takes place. So what does it look like? So just like the sun is the center of the universe, the strategic vision is the center of alignment. And let me repeat it again. As the sun is the center of the universe, the strategic vision is the center of alignment for an organization. And I will go through these, what you see here on the screen. Once you have a vision, you must use a change agenda. And the change agenda is a concept in which you ask yourself as a leader, what changes need to take place in my organization in order to reach the vision? So what domains do we need to change in order to meet the strategic vision of the organization? And in the change agenda, we identify performance domains like leadership, systems, technologies, and then we describe the current state. How does it function today? And then we describe the future state. How will it function in order to help us achieve the strategic vision? Then we build out a strategy map that supports it. Then we build out a scorecard that have metrics that support the strategy map, that support the change agenda. Then we identify strategic risk within our plan. Before we do anything, we have to identify the risk, because if we don't identify the risk, then the plan could fail based on something happened that we didn't identify to mitigate. We align executive performance plans to the risk and to the strategy, meaning we have to get the alignment of the executive leaders or the strategy will not fully be executed. We tie budget to the strategy. We align the business unit, the people, culture, and the systems, a communication plan, a change strategy to mitigate resistance. We create a governance calendar so everybody across the organization can know exactly when the progress of the plan. And lastly, we do strategic review, strategy review meetings. We have to have those because through those meetings, we learn through iterative learning how the strategy, how do we need to dial up or dial back based on what we're seeing, based on results in the progress. If we're not able to achieve certain targets and we have the lack of resources to achieving those targets, or some people left the organization, we may have to dial back or we may have to dial up. It depends. And that's why the review meetings are important. So the last thing that ties the alignment is the strategy review meetings. And we're going to get into these buckets as we go forward. So what is the purpose of strategic alignment? What we're trying to achieve is enterprise-derived value, right? The purpose of alignment is to achieve enterprise-derived value, meaning the sum of the total is greater than the sum of the individual, right? In most organizations, we have vertical silo structures, and the resources are within those silo structures, the system, the resource, the people, and so forth. If we look horizontally across an organization, we can see that if we could leverage a horizontal alignment across an institution, then we can leverage how we spend financially with our suppliers, because we can leverage the collective instead of the individual unit. We can leverage how we deliver our products, right? So if the science, education, and research, if they're working collectively together, we can deliver a better product to our customer. If it's healthcare, if it's higher ed, or if it's manufacturing. So one thing about it is value creation synergy. If we integrate and align through coordination of activities across all the pillars of an organization. We create that, we have value creation synergies that is derived across an organization. And the thing different between energy is impacting something in the force of energy. Synergy is the opposite. Synergy is it's not a concept of 1 + 1 = 2. Synergy is a concept of 1 + 1 = 3, 4, 5. It's other derived things that we don't know happening. It's happening because of their synergy. Once we have value creation synergy, then we have customer value proposition. So think about it. If we have students in an academic medical institution, and we have a healthcare system which students do rotation. So how do we look at it and identify how do we create customer value proposition? So that actual student should actually benefit not from education, but also from the medical center, meaning a reduction in cost of medical services because of that student. It is the same customer as a student, as a faculty, and as a patient. So how do we give derived value to one customer who is seen as multiple customer across the span of our institution? Those are things we need to consider as we think of enterprise derived value. At the end, we have our enterprise value proposition, right? If it's a healthcare institution, and we have education, research, and clinical care. From the actual research, we're always studying population health and ways to advance our population through the triple aim concepts like that, the reduce of care per capita for the patient, but also we're studying and we're learning through value-based care, which helps deliver a better outcome for our patients, as well as our students are learning these new systems through our research and able to do clinical rotations to help give us the care that we need for our patients. So what does it look like? This is what a misaligned organization looks like when you think of strategic alignment. And this is what an aligned organization looks like when you think of strategic alignment. A misaligned organization means the business unit are pulling in different direction and they're affecting the force of gravity as we think of the universe. They're affecting the force. We need to streamline that energy and that force in one direction and to leverage our organization. So what does that look like? If we streamline the force in one direction, which remember, competitive advantage lives within the business unit, not the corporate. Although we streamline it in one direction, the individual business unit are still competitive within their industry, right? It's not separating their competitiveness. They're still competitive, but we're streamlining the forces in one direction, and we can get economies of scale. We can get aligned business units, horizontal integrated outcomes, cascading objective, budget, a set of initiative that cuts across the institution instead of a list of some executive's initiative that he or she just wants to do. Shared resources and shared resources. Now, what I want to show you is this is a book that I published called the Executive Performance Journal, and it helps us to understand where we are within the strategy process. It's like a roadmap. And I'm showing you this because when I get to the next slide and I go through the presentation, we're going to follow the concept of how the book lays out a direction for strategy. So this book is a Bible for executives or people who are trying to get into the strategy space, consultants, where they have a streamlined step-by-step method of applying strategy management. And here is the model within the book. So it basically tells us there's 4 areas that we have to focus on in strategy management. One is the analyze phase. One is the development phase. The third is the execution phase. And the fourth is management phase. We have to consider these pieces and not necessarily have to do each one, but we have to consider these pieces if we're trying to truly create enterprise-derived value for an organization. Today, we want to only focus on one of the elements within this actual model. So let's talk about alignment. Alignment is basically, if you look at this model here, alignment falls under the execution phase. But when I say alignment precursors, I mean that although alignment falls in the execution phase, there are precursors to alignment before we get to the execution phase. And it starts with the strategic vision, the change agenda, and the strategy map. We have to make sure those are aligned as we segue into the execution phase. So what does that look like? The strategic vision is the core of strategy. It is the anchor. It is the sun of the universe as it relates to institutional strategy. A strategic vision tells us a destination, a strategic horizon, and it tells us, and it gives us a time when we will achieve that. A strategic initiative is, strategic vision is like a big goal or something that has a target, meaning by 2026, we will have achieved something. A strategic vision has an expiration date. It is not something you copy and paste into each strategy every 5 years. The market is dynamic. The market is innovation. It will consistently change. The strategic vision has to change as well, or an organization stands the chance of being disrupted. A strategic vision has 3 elements: a strategic horizon, a time in the future, a bold statement, and a actual niche, a position in the market. So let's look at one for a second. So to become the largest innovative and adaptive land-grant institution, a bold statement. A definition of a niche in the market: to create world-class online educational program that consists of world-class research, scholarship, and education. The time horizon is 2025. If we put it all together, by 2025, the University of Arizona will become the largest innovative and adaptive learning online institution, land-grant institution through the Centers of World-Class Research, Scholarship, and Education. You have to be able to take your strategic vision, break it apart into 3 elements, and make sure you are addressing those elements because they're critical. The organization needs to be aligned to this strategic vision. The strategy needs to be developed based on the strategic vision to drive performance towards something. Everybody in the institution know that by 2025, we will have achieved this particular bold vision. So we mobilize the people in our organization to be able to achieve this bold vision. Now, the model I shared with you earlier, this is the second element after we created the sun, which is the bold vision. We have to determine the changes that we need to make in the organization in order to reach and achieve this strategic vision. And a perfect management tool to do this is what we call a strategic change agenda. So what actually is a strategic change agenda? Remember now, all of this is creating alignment within the organization, alignment to the vision. A strategic change agenda is a tool that identifies and assess the current state, the as-is state, and to project the desired future state, the as-is and the to-be state. The strategic change agenda is trying to communicate that. Here's the thing about a strategic change agenda. Before the strategy is ever developed, the strategic change agenda should be socialized with an organization to give them time to react to it. So people within the organization across the 3 tiers, the executive, mid-level, and frontline workers in the organization, should be able to respond to the strategic change agenda prior to the development of a strategic plan. That means that at this point, they can have feedback on the strategy before the strategy is developed, where people voices are heard across the institution as the strategy is fully formulated. The strategic change agenda must be formulated and aligned according to the strategic vision. So you're basically saying what elements need to change within our organization to achieve this actual vision. So here's a model. Before I get to the core of an actual example of a strategic change agenda, I want to show you something from this model. If you look to the far left, the first thing we need to identify are performance dimensions, right? Elements within the organization is, what is it? Leadership? Is it technology? Is it the people? Is it the culture? What needs to change in order to achieve the vision? Then you identify the as is, right? If it's the leadership, what about leadership? How do the leadership function today? Is it a bureaucratic organization that prevents innovation? Or is it the opposite? Is it a process-driven leadership? Is it a discovery-driven leadership? What type of leadership do we have, and what type of leadership do we want? Then we go to the to be state. What is the desired leadership we need to drive this strategy? And then you go to the value gap. The value gap is, what is the difference between the to be and the as is, right? What are the challenges we will have as an organization to take us from the as is to the to be state? So let's look at one, for example. So if this is the strategic vision, we will be the best acute care provider in the South through the synergies of research, clinical care, and leadership. And our leadership team say, okay, what performance dimensions do we need to change in order to achieve this vision? And they identify 4: geography, quality of systems, nurses, healthcare professionals, and patient experience. Once they identify those domains, they have to also describe how do they function today. Geography, it says high dense urban populations, quality of system, decentralized electronic medical records. Healthcare professional, there's a shortage. And patient experience, fee for service, inconsistent in care coordination, care non-existence. The desired future state, this is a simple activity, but I'm telling you, it's critical to the alignment of strategy and the development of strategy. The desired future state: expanding rural populated areas, streamline EMR system across all of the rural health centers, for nurse healthcare professional shortage, optimize ratio of healthcare professions in desired geographies to meet patient need. And when it comes to patient experience for fee for care, shift to value-based care, top rated and innovative patient experiences and coordinated care. So we're trying to go from the current state to the future state, but in order to get there, it creates what we call a value gap. There's a value gap in our organization that if it's not closed, we will not get to the desired future state of our strategic vision. So what I have here are some elements that I place in the value gap, because once we actually create the change agenda, we have to do research and investigate what are the current state, what's the numbers for the current state, and where we need to be in the future. So you see the first one, it says, as geography, 15 out of 30 rural health populations have rural health center and federally qualified health centers. 15 out of 30 rural populations. So obviously we may want to increase it from 15 to 2025. Would cost money, would cost our organization money to do that. We have 75% lack Wi-Fi towers. If we're trying to leverage digital health, we definitely need to focus on Wi-Fi towers and so forth. So what you see in the value gap are elements that lead to strategic objectives. The strategic objectives are developed based on the value gap. We're not just developing objectives because we want to. The strategic change agenda helps us to understand what type of objectives we need to actually fulfill our strategic vision. I want to get, if anybody can give feedback on this. this is an opportunity really, because I want to make sure this one really stick, because this is a core. Anybody?
I think with the value gap, I think that at the basis of the value gap has to be honesty and just being real with the process.
Okay.
Because you can want to close that gap, but if fundamentally you have not accurately assessed the assets, and 2B, you're going to have a flawed value gap, and you're going to run with a flawed value gap. So I think as strategy managers, I think that process needs to be thorough. And the people that are providing the inputs also need to, it's almost like something you do in a very technical, unemotional manner so that you can actually see what is. But if you get so emotionally involved in it, then you might not be able to dissect it, like being very analytical about the process, which you need to be in order to be able to move forward.
I agree with you, Dr. Abby. You have to be honest. The people in the organization must be honest when they complete this document. They have to be all in, meaning everybody has to be all in and pour from their individual strengths to determine what needs to be in this actual tool. They cannot be selfish. Leader, the alignment of an organization means you have to remove your selfishness as a leader as it relates to trying to garner as much resources, financial resources you can into your own vertical business unit. We're talking about the organization as a collective. So we have to think as a collective when we build this activity and when we complete the actual changes in it. Anyone else has any feedback on this?
Yeah, Mario, I was wanting to ask, when we look at value gap, would that also be considered barriers to reach the desired future to be state?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it is incorrect, Julian. It is a barrier. It's when you think of the current state as is and the desired future state, in between the two, that's where the value gap lives. And it's barriers, it's and how to achieve and how to get beyond those specific barriers. And it's growth, areas that we need to grow in. So we think about all those things. We think about partnerships. We think about our human capital, the people. We think about our technologies, our systems. We think about everything, a policy. Julian, a policy could be a barrier that prevents us from actually achieving certain things. So we have to reevaluate a lot of things that we're currently doing in order to help us achieve our future state.
Well, how much would be too much, Mario? Sometimes, there's so many barriers. You could probably spend a whole brainstorming session coming up with the value gap / barriers to reaching that desired state. What do you look at when you're looking at these value gaps, as far as how many and what is the focus? Because you could end up with 1,000.
Yeah.
So how would you mentally, if you're working as a group to determine these value gaps, how would you bring it back into a reasonable number? I guess would be the lack of a better term.
So based on best practice, it's less than 10 elements based on best practice, Julian. So when we think of it, the entire conversation is what changes, what enterprise level changes should we make or must make to help us achieve our strategic vision? What enterprise level changes, not just business, what enterprise level changes should we make to achieve our strategic vision? And most of the time, there's an example I can send you, Julian, from Mueller, as after 9/11, as he created one for the office of the presidency to determine how the the special agency, the Secret Service agency, should function post 9/11. And I think he identified maybe 10 elements that needed to change. But yeah, less than 10 is a best practice.
Well, that'd be great. I appreciate that, Mario. And I think you just kind of brought it back in. It's enterprise wide. It's not like individual business units. Like we don't have enough copy paper or something like that.
No.
It's enterprise wide value gap. So yeah, thank you for the clarification on that, Mario.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Hey Mario,
How you doing, Mo?
how do you have any advice on like how would you handle it if the management team of an organization can't get or like struggles to get behind a strategic vision together? If there are like any gaps between individuals.
So repeat it, Mo. How would, if they struggle to do what?
To get everyone behind a strategic vision.
So good question, Mo. So the strategic vision is it's a collective effort. So I tend to use more nudging concepts to get leaders behind a strategic vision. I tend to identify the stakeholders across the leadership team who has the most influence. And I work with stakeholders, I pair stakeholders together to influence other stakeholders to get them on board with these concepts, right? From the chancellor or the president all the way across the cabinet leader, all the way to the board. I tend to identify those who are close to people who have a sense of resistance. And I tend to nudge them and tell them what I'm experiencing from the resistor, and pair them together so they can have a conversation to try to get those people on board. Right. So nudging. And here's the thing about nudging, Mo. Nudging is I call them sprints, like different tests. I will set a nudge up for maybe 2 weeks, and I'll see the progress within 2 weeks of that specific leader. And if I see the leader start turning the corner, I move forward. But if the leader is not turning the corner, I will do another nudge. I will identify another stakeholder to go and approach that leader.
Got it.
Good question.
Thank you.
Well, I think also, Mario, if you think about it, when you're looking at strategic vision and change in general, sometimes the leaders don't see what's in it for them.
Yes.
So that's a big component to why should we do this kind of statement or nudge, so to speak.
Yeah. A lot of it is it's change management 101, right, Julian? All this is about change management. We have to be able to mitigate and manage change whenever we're doing it. Remember, a strategic plan is a change.
Yes.
It's a change, and sometimes it's a shock to an organization. And we have to be able to address the shock in organization. And we have to mitigate and manage it according to change. So we have to have effective change people on board in order to identify resistors at the cabinet level, at the board level, and across the organization within each business unit level to mitigate that resistance in order to move the strategy forward.
Absolutely.
So let's go. Let's talk a little more. So the first thing is we have to align to a strategic vision. Then we build out a change agenda that supports the strategic vision. Then we build out what we call a strategy map. So a strategy map is a cause and effect diagram that's populated with strategic objectives. So every box on here is a strategic objective. I'm using an HR example in this particular presentation today. A strategy map consists of 4 perspectives. The top is financial, second is stakeholder or customer or patient, however you choose to name it. The third is internal processes, and the fourth is talent and technology. You may have heard in the past is learning and growth. That is still a perspective that's used, but one of the latest based on research studies, talent and technology is something consistent that we're seeing now across research. Now, when we think of the financials, you think of short and long-term outcomes. So at the top of your map is the core, and you're driving from the bottom to the top. At the top, you think of short-term and long-term financial goals. Stakeholder perspective, you think of the value proposition. What value do we want to deliver to our customers, and how do we deliver that value? We think of internal processes. We think of two things, multiple things, but two things. It's how do we look at our current processes and find a way to consistently improve on those current processes to drive value to the customer. And once we drive value to our customers, we indirectly drive financial value to the organization. Now, but how do we do it? We have to go down to the talent and technology, meaning we have to have the right people. We call it human capital, the right systems. We call it technology capital, and the right culture, and that's organizational capital. So the strategic objectives at the bottom of the map must address human capital. How do we recruit, hire, and develop the people? Technology capital. How do we augment the people with certain technologies to do their work? And lastly, technological capital. And lastly, organizational capital. What is the culture? What type of leadership development do we need? How do we align the people to the strategy? And what is the culture we need to drive performance, right? Remember, I said earlier that a strategic vision has an expiration date. So when you think of this strategy, it has an expiration date as well. So the culture that we align with a strategy is the culture that we want to foster through the life cycle of this particular strategic plan. What culture do we need to ensure that we can drive value to our strategies? And I'm gonna give you an example. If we are seeking a culture of discovery, we want people to innovate and discover. If that's the culture we want, that's the culture we have to foster. We have to make sure that we build elements across our policies, our procedures, everything that gives us the ability to discover and innovate. That's different than a process-driven culture. A lean culture is a different type of culture. So our strategy predicts the culture that we want to foster, and we have to be intentional on how we foster that culture. Does that make sense? So this document is not just a concept of how do we foster the culture. This is a communication tool as well. So that means that everybody in the organization, once this tool is developed, they can actually communicate it out to anybody. So what does that mean? Kaplan, he does an experiment, and this is the Kaplan and Norton are the two authors of the Balanced Scorecard from the Harvard Business School. What Kaplan says when he go to organization that he worked with on strategy, he would do unannounced visits, and the first person he sees he enter into the organization that's an employee, he would ask, "Tell me, how does the work that you're doing right now impacts the strategy?" That's the first person, employee, that he sees in the organization. This is not a cabinet leader. This is not a board leader. It could be a frontline worker, a mid-level leader, or an executive. And he would take an assessment as he approached people. And he said that that person should be able to pull out a map or to be able to say, my work impacts P4 on the institutional strategy. The work that I'm doing right now impacts P4. That's a direct alignment to the actual strategy. So this document needs to be penetrated throughout the organization, diffused throughout the organization to ensure everybody's aligned with it. And it goes all the way back up to the strategic vision. So how do the strategy map function? Across the top, you have tangible outcomes, financial tangible outcomes, things that we've seen for years that's associated with a balance sheet. right? At the bottom, we have intangible. The challenge that most leaders have is that they cannot put a measure on intangible outcomes. They can measure tangible outcomes because we have systems for over 50 years that taught us how to manage a budget, right? How to do capital investments, different strategic expenditures. We've learned that over time. The challenge that most leaders have are intangible assets, the people, the culture, and the technology, not truly being able to understand how to measure the value from the people, the technology, and culture. Here's the thing. Intangible assets do not add value unless they are aligned with the strategy. You have to know how they have to be aligned. So the intangible assets have to be directly aligned to the tangible assets on the strategy map, meaning we can determine the cause and effect relationship between how the people are helping us to achieve our financial outcomes, how the culture is helping us achieve our financial outcome, how the technology system and policies are helping us to achieve our financial outcome. We have to see an alignment from the bottom of the map to the top of the map. And what we do at strategy review meetings is we test the hypothesis, we test the alignment, we ask ourselves, so we're trying to maximize return on human capital investment, as you see F1 at the top. And are we, based on T1 and T2, are we maximizing return on human capital investment? T1 and T2, that means that we're recruiting, we hiring, and we're developing. We're developing bench strength. Through those things, we should directly see an increase on maximizing return on investment. That's the cause and effects lineation. That's the logic of this map. Anybody have feedback on this one? Because this is another core that we have to make sure that we can connect with.
I think we have we often have a challenge, or even in the post-pandemic environment, there's a greater challenge with intangible assets, especially with people. And how do you manage people, and how do you understand what may be going on and what may be distracting them from aligning with the strategic vision of an enterprise? So I almost feel like in a post-pandemic environment, we all need to become social psychologists.
Okay.
And degreed in emotional intelligence in order to, because fundamentally, I think people mean well. But I think in a post-pandemic environment, we're probably more distracted now by a lot of things, and we have a whole new generation coming into the workforce. Their values are clashing with the old school. So I almost feel, to your point, in your body of work, what have you seen that is working in order to bridge the gap that would enhance our ability to move the intangible assets forward? The tangible assets, I think we already have that down packed. I think our challenge area is mostly in intangible assets. What are you seeing as you go out and as you talk to people in your body of work that is helping strategy managers to manage the intangible assets?
So the first thing, and we're gonna cover it in this actual presentation, is something called human capital readiness. It's we have the traditional leadership program that we do to develop our leaders and develop our employees in our organization. But the goal is we have to align them to the strategy first. And if we align the people and the leaders to the strategy, then we can take an assessment to determine what are the competency and skill gaps to drive the strategy forward. And most of the time when I present leaders with the human capital readiness plan, they achieve that aha moment. Like, wow, never seen this before, didn't know it existed. And that human capital readiness plan helps us to mobilize the exact skills, the exact competencies, the exact attributes that the leaders and that employees need to drive that specific strategy. But let me go a little further. So remember I said that competitive advantage lives within the business unit. It's how the business unit competes within their own industry, its own industry, okay? So the human capital readiness plan is a plan that supports the elements per business unit. I'm not saying the corporate plan. I have to, or strategists have to develop a human capital readiness plan for each business unit, because each business unit is competing differently with their competitors within that specific business. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's truly what I found to be the linchpin that gets the leaders on board when it comes to a strategy, especially when it comes to the intangibles. Because with the human capital readiness plan, I identify how do we measure the progress of the people if they're moving forward? How do we measure the progress of the culture if it's moving forward? How do we measure the progress of the technology as it impacts the people, augments the people, to show that we can move the strategy forward? So once they see that we have metrics, because the first thing leaders would say is that there's impossible, I don't know how to measure. I mean, what do we measure? How many people that we hired? How many people we recruited? A leadership development program? How do we develop the impact of those, the training, that intervention on the people who went through it? Well, we do that through human capital readiness. So let's go further so we can. So this is what we call, this is the how. The bottom impacts the top. And what we do at a strategy review meeting, we're testing hypotheses. Strategy is a hypothesis, right? It's like research. We're learning as we go with our strategy. It's not punitive. There is no true right or wrong. What we're trying to do is learn through our strategy so that we know as we go forward, after each strategy review meeting, the successes that we've gained, the challenges that we're having, and how we can pull the collective from a horizontal conversation, leaders across the institution, to help us understand how to move things forward based on what we're learning. Again, we have to align the intangibles to the tangibles. And at the strategy review meeting, we're testing that hypothesis. Are the intangibles moving us towards our tangible outcomes? So we have strategic initiative, and the only action item that exists within a strategic plan is a strategic initiative. So as we're building out a balanced scorecard, we have to, before we build it out, we have to determine our strategic initiatives. If you look at this particular, it says the objective, increase access to care. The measure is the number of medical centers in rural counties. And the strategic initiative, the project, is partner with local leaders in the private sector and investors to increase the number of medical centers in rural counties. That is the initiative. But what is the purpose of the initiative? The strategic initiative is to drive that strategic objective towards that target. You determine that bold strategic initiative that can drive the strategic objective towards its target, right? It may be two initiatives that you think for this specific one, and the initiative also has an alignment. It's not just what we call a project. We call these strategic initiative because they support a specific element within the strategic plan. And that strategic initiative has resources attached to it, a budget, people, and a timeline, and so forth to help us accomplish that actual strategic objective. But the goal of it is, again, it is designed to drive that strategic objective towards its target. How do we achieve 10,000 medical professionals? By developing a scorecard that aligns strategic job families to them. That is one element that helps us to drive towards the actual strategic objective. So this is an alignment to the strategy, as well as the change agenda is in alignment to the vision. The strategy map is alignment to the change agenda with the strategic objectives. And then we get to the actual strategic initiatives. So now those were precursors that leads to alignment. Now we get to the core, the crux of now the execution phase of strategy is where the alignment truly lives. These are functions that we have to do to increase the alignment of the strategy. And these are the elements of the alignment: risk management, alignment of resources to the strategic plan, cascading business unit and the people, communication plan, and change management. These are elements, and one another is alignment of the executive leaders to the strategy. And I'll show you that as we go through. So strategic risk. You know, every strategy has some type of risk to it, especially if we're trying to stretch ourselves as an organization. But to be able to identify the risk within the strategy and to create mitigation plans around that strategic risk is helping us to ensure that we can accomplish our goals. There are three categories of risk, and the first one is a known, and that's a risk that human resources already identify. It's things that we've identified that we've written policy for, and that is a category 1 risk, but that is not a strategic risk. A strategic risk is category 2. So when we think of our strategy and we look across our strategy, the type of risk that we're seeking is a strategic risk. So a strategic risk is what we call a known unknown. We know that something may happen, but we don't know if it will. So I'm gonna give an example. If we're trying to build out Wi-Fi towers across rural populated areas, and our contact is a local politician who's working with a cable provider to ensure these Wi-Fi connections, and the president of our organization has to work and build a relationship with this politician to make it happen. But this is a core of our strategic plan. Over time, as that president continued to foster and develop that relationship, if the relationship breaks, if something happened to the relationship, it can jeopardize the implementation of that infrastructure of Wi-Fi towers going up across that rural population. With that in mind, we create a mitigation plan and a contingency plan around that specific element of strategy, so that if that relationship fails, how do we, because we really need these Wi-Fi towers in the rural populated area, how do we go from a plan A to a plan B to ensure that we still can successfully accomplish that actual strategic initiative? So we identify within our strategy where the risks live. And if the risk exists, then what we do is we build a contingency plan around that actual risk. Now, all of this happens before the strategy is ever executed, right? Everything I'm showing you so far is before the strategy is executed. So what does that look like? Back to the strategy map. So this is what it looks like. We identify on the map where the risk exists. If it's a high risk, we highlight it in red, and it varies as it goes down. We make sure, and we have risk, we have numbers there because those numbers are associated with descriptions, and those numbers are associated with leaders in our organization who are responsible for the risk or the compliance. Although that leader and the risk is also managed by the compliance office and the enterprise risk management office, there is a owner of the risk who's trying to mitigate the risk. The risk may come from a specific business unit, but the compliance and the enterprise risk office is reporting that risk to the board, is reporting that risk to the cabinet. They have a ownership too. So there has to be a partnership with the compliance team, the enterprise risk team, and the risk owner as it relates to the actual risk. So basically the compliance team and the risk team the enterprise risk management team helps the risk owner to determine the level of risk that that specific strategic priority would cause the strategy if it's not executed. And mitigation plans are the same as a strategic initiative. If this particular initiative that we're working on to accomplish it fails, or the relationship breaks and it leads to a plan B, then the mitigation plan is an initiative that has to take place, that has an owner and has resources to execute on. Anybody has feedback on this one?
I think as the compliance and the risk management or risk mitigation teams work together, I think they work together against the backdrop of what the risk appetite is for the company. Because you may have a company that operates more like what we'll call, quote unquote, a dinosaur, as opposed to a company that operates like a fail fast, a startup mentality. And one has to find a way of tweaking, the strategy, the maps and everything to line up with what kind of organization one is working into. Higher education setups typically are more solid, strategic, tried and true. But now we're seeing a lot of startups, where, sometimes, and not demeaning what they do, but sometimes it's like throw it against the wall and see which one sticks.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can't do business that way, but people are doing business that way. And so what are you seeing in terms of the need for you as a strategy experts to pivot, depending on what kind of organization you're going into, whether it's one with a startup mentality or one that has a more tried and true mentality?
So that's a great question. So I haven't worked with a lot of organization with startup mentality. It's more of a bureaucratic organizations that I've dealt with, large higher ed, academic medicine, manufacturing, and most of them are very bureaucratic. So I have to go in with nudging strategies initially. So I have to go in, identify all the leaders across the cabinet, identify the people across the board, then get some intel on who they are, what makes them tick, and then put together a stakeholder strategy to start to penetrate them as a stakeholder leadership. And the whole thing is for me to get at least 25% on board. Once I know I have 25% of those leaders on board through the stakeholder nudging strategy, then I go full-fledged when it comes to the concepts of strategy. But I have to do that first. And when I say bureaucrat, I mean that people who have been in organizations for a long time and who are highly resistant to change, especially when you talk about organizational alignment. That's something that's you have to be a strong consultant, a strong strategist that understand these things, and don't be naive in going into organization because the president hired you to come in and help do the work. There will be major roadblocks for you. And so you have to start mitigating those roadblocks before you ever begin to interact with those leaders. So when it comes to this one, risk, one thing you have to do when you come to the organization, you have to make it clear to the president, the chancellor, and so forth that, and even if you're working within the organization, you have to bring the certain people to the table. You have to go to the enterprise risk management team. You have to go to the compliance team. You have to go to human resources team, and you have to get all of them in the same room. And you have to talk about compliance and enterprise risk at that level. And you three have to come up with some type of plan, and we present that, or you help present that to executive leadership, because all three are considered support groups. They're not customer facing. They are internal customer facing. You have to make sure that all three are aligned and on board in order to move the strategy forward. If you do not have a risk plan for your strategy, you will have challenges with your strategy over time. Again, if there is no risk plan with your strategy, you will have challenges with your strategy over time. So make sure you identify the risk and you populate your strategy where the risk is. And as you go to these strategy review meetings, these colors that you see on this map, you need to shift them to green. The goal is to turn these colors green over time. They shouldn't be going in the opposite direction towards red. They should be going towards green. Okay, so let's connect the cabinet with the actual strategy. So let's go back here with the strategy map, because I have to land you, I have to anchor you on where the information, what it happens at. At the top of the map is the ownership of the executive leadership team. The cabinet owns the outcome of the strategy. Everything else underneath it is owned by business unit and people across your organization. So when it comes to the outcomes of the strategy, the cabinet leaders are responsible for reporting these outcomes to the board and to each other. So let's look at the top. If the top is become a top ranked hospital in the nation, increase new revenues in, I think I spelled that wrong, reduce cost of care per patient. If these are the outcomes for your strategy, the leadership, the cabinet leads are responsible for the outcome. So their performance plans, the performance plans or the performance appraisal plans for the cabinet team is associated with the outcomes of the strategic plan. At the top of the map, there may be multiple measures and multiple targets for each one. There may be 3 or 4 for each one of the, like these 3 here, 01 through 03. They could be 3 measures for 01, 3 measures for 02, 3 measures for 03. So if there's a finance officer, that finance officer is responsible for 02, as well as the president or the chancellor responsible for 02. If there is a CEO of a hospital, that person is responsible for 01, as well as the president is responsible for 01. Reduce cost of care per patient, that's finance, that's also the healthcare section, that's also research. So at the top of your map, of your strategy map, is where we hold our executive leadership team responsible for the execution of the strategy. They have to be linked to the strategy and they have to do the work. That means that leading up to the strategy review meeting, they need to know exactly what the progress and the status is and be able to report out on it. Not only report out on it, they also need to be able to tell in those meetings, those collective horizontal meetings, what he or she is doing to influence that we achieve. And is there any risk associated with this particular strategic outcome? How are we mitigating? How are we resourcing? Do we need to dial back or do we need to dial up? The executive person needs to be able to have that conversation when it comes to the actual strategy review meetings and when it comes to these strategic priorities. Again, the cabinet leader plans are built around the outcome perspective of the strategy map or the scorecard. Any feedback on this one? And so let me say this, most of the time when we have a strategy, organizations have strategic plans, they actually place them on the intranet and they hope that people haphazardly navigate to them. We have to tie and anchor the cabinet to the strategy. Then we have to tie and anchor through cascading the business unit leaders to the strategy. Then we have to tie and anchor the people to the strategy through human capital readiness plans. We have to keep cascading down in the organization to ensure strategic alignment. We also have to align resources. So now we've aligned the cabinet, now we need to align the resources. So aligning resources to a strategic plan. So there's a concept called StratX. It actually means strategic expenditures. So the initiatives that cuts across the enterprise, the big, bold initiatives, that cuts across all the business units and that's supported at the institutional level, the corporate strategy, we need to be able to identify what those initiatives are, and we need to add a budget to those initiatives. One way to ensure that we can do this is to, if the strategic plan is targeted to create a profit of $1 billion, we can set a target of 20%. We can say 20% of that billion will be repurposed and reinvested back into the organization for the strategic expenditures. So we're not trying to find additional money. We can find the money by saying 20% of the profits over the next 5 years will be reinvested back into the organization, and it'd be managed by the business and finance office for staff development and to develop these actual particular strategic initiatives, also to bring the compensation plan to market salary, right? Sometimes we have issues with our compensation plans. How can we solve them? By taking a percent of the profits gained from the strategic plan and investing it into our compensation plan to bring people up to market value. So this is a concept called StratX. And most of the time when I talk to CFOs in business units, in organizations, they're not familiar with the concept of, they're not familiar with the concept of StratX. So this is it's not a new concept, but it's a concept that came out in the past 10 to 15 years that a lot of CFOs are not familiar with. But when it comes to strategy, you must have a separate line item called StratX, a separate budgeting line item called StratX. And the purpose of it is to fund the strategic initiatives, strategic expenditures within a strategic plan. And we need to be able to see what those strategic expenditures are so that we can, especially if we are a human resources department, when it comes to staff development, we use those fundings, not our funds within our business unit. We use the fundings gained from StratX to fund leaders and employees across the institution, as well as to purchase new technologies and to assess the level of engagement of our staff in order to help us foster the right culture. So this is the last part of this particular section. It's strategic initiative versus culture initiatives. So as I said again, there's a concept called StratX. And StratX, again, is to fund the strategic expenditures within strategy. But here's the problem. When strategic initiatives are developed in isolation of culture initiatives, we create what we call competing priorities. If you look at the left and you look at the right, if the left are strategic initiative for an organization, and the right are culture initiative, things that changes the dynamics of the culture. Both of these initiatives on both sides have to be funded. And if they're developed in isolation, and then you take both sets of initiatives to the CFO will tell you that we don't have the funding for all of these initiatives. These initiatives should have been developed together and not in isolation, and presented to the CFO at the same time so that we can see which one that we can actually fund. If you see one side, you have 9 strategic initiatives worth $2.7 million. And on the other side, you have 7 culture initiatives worth $1.2 million. We have strategy and culture are one and the same. You cannot separate the two. But the initiatives for culture and the initiative to advance the strategy are somewhat different. Culture initiative is to foster a dynamic culture that can support the strategy. And the strategic priorities are there to drive the strategic objective towards its target. We need a combination of both but we need to develop them together and not in isolation. So we won't have the problem of not being able to fund certain cultural initiatives or certain strategic initiatives. And what happens is, in order to really advance that strategy, we need the culture and the strategic initiatives to drive that strategy forward. So if you don't develop them together, competing priorities can kill your strategic plan. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go a little further. So now that we've aligned the budget, we've aligned the executive leadership team, we talked about competing priorities. Now let's talk more about the alignment. How do we cascade strategic priorities down an organization? These are two books that I recommend. One is called Alignment by Robert Kaplan and David Norton, and the other is called Competing Strategies by Michael Porter. Cascading is a component of strategic alignment. The concept of cascading leverage the corporate portfolio. So remember I said earlier that the business unit strategies is where competitive advantage lives, because you're competing against an industry within your business unit. The corporate strategy is nothing but a work of portfolio, right? So elements from the business unit strategy populates into the corporate strategy, and that is a portfolio of work from the business unit. But the portfolio of work are the high level things that the corporate strategy needs to survive. So basically you build those individual business unit strategy and you identify key components of it and you pull it up to the corporate level, and that is the corporate portfolio of strategic priorities. And what drive at the corporate level, the president and the cabinet sets the direction. So they determine what pieces of the business unit strategy needs to come into the corporate portfolio. Does that make sense? So, but here's the thing, there's two approaches to cascading. One is a top down and one is a bottom up. And let's talk about what it looks like. So if you think of strategic objectives within the strategic plan, you have strategic objective, but when you cascade them down from a strategic plan, it's more like a copy and paste. How do you copy and paste something from the corporate strategy down into the business unit? You do it through a concept called cascading. One of the categories is called mandatory. So if you see at the top where it says the parent, and you see at the bottom it says cascade, what that means is you take a strategic objective off the parent strategy and you copy and paste it word for word into the child strategy, into the business unit strategy. Contributory means you take the parent strategy and you don't copy and paste word for word that actual strategic objective to the child strategy. What you do, you allow the business unit leader who owns that child strategy to determine how that strategy should be worded. And it would have a different wording at the child's level. It's not going to be word for word as the mandatory, right? So basically this is a negotiation of a president or a CFO or a chancellor with a business unit leader. So it's a one-on-one negotiation. It's a one-on-one setting. The president and the strategist have the strategic plan on the desk. And across from that person is the business unit leader. And we're talking about everything within the strategic plan. You say, oh, this objective should go on your plan word for word. You own this. You're the one owning it. Oh, this strategic objective from a contributory should go on your plan, but your business unit is so unique to how it does its work, it should be written differently to fit your business unit. And this one, the parent strategy said this one does not go on your plan at all. So you just create some type of new objective that indirectly support the parent goal. Does that make sense? So when you do a cascade, it looks like this. So when you look across, you have mandatory, contributory, and new. So when you're negotiating with that person across the table from you, you have a one-sheeter like this, and you go down with X's. You tell that leader, as the president, as a strategist talking to that leader in that meeting, that O1 is mandatory. It must be on your strategic plan word for word. O2, P1 is contributory. You need to tell me how you plan on supporting this one. You have ownership of it, but in a unique way. So tell me how you support it. T1 is contributory and T2 is mandatory. So basically, once we leave this negotiating meeting, the strategists get a copy of this document. The president keeps a copy of it, and the business unit leader keeps a copy. Now the strategists can go directly work with the business unit leader to finish building out their individual business unit strategy. Any feedback on this document, on this information? How you doing, Marshall? We'll bring you up to speed. I know you just, we'll bring you up to speed. You can say.
At what? Oh, sorry about that. At what points are you able to inject some of the culture strategies, some of the cultural initiatives that may have been left out? Is it possible that the BU at their level, once they get the mandatory and the contributory, they can add additional cultural leaning initiatives into their strategy?
So great question, Dr. Abby. So you see here where it says the objective: become a top-ranked health organization in the country, expand partnership and recruit and hire. That is the objective, but the objective has behind it are the strategic initiatives associated with it. So when the cascade takes place, it includes the culture strategic initiative and the other strategic initiative, especially if it's mandatory. If it's mandatory, they have to do it. They own it. They own the strategic initiatives also. So it's not just the objective that we're talking about, mandatory, contributory, new. Every objective in this document has associative initiatives and things that supports it. So in the conversation, the whole strategic plan will be open as we're talking to that leader across the table, and we'll be highlighting certain strategic initiatives that they will be owning that's associated with it. And there could be culture initiatives or strategic initiatives. So they will be able to see the whole gamut of the strategy in that negotiation conversation. And the reason we call it negotiation, because we want those leaders to push against what the CFO, the CEO, and the president or the chancellor is saying. We want them to push against and say, well, I think I can do it better if we did it this way. So that's why we call these negotiating meetings. It's not forcing people to do the work. It's having a conversation, using emotional intelligence and psychological safety in the conversation to create a more wholesome and holistic approach to strategy. So this is called a cascading objective matrix. So once the plan is developed and once the risk has been associated with it, we take it, we pull those objectives into a matrix like this, and then we go out and have a conversation with those leaders as a communication tool in those meetings. This is the tool that helps us to foster and gain the goals of that actual cascading meeting. So now let's talk about it. Let's talk more in depth about the two types of cascades. We have a top-down approach, which is you create the corporate strategy first before you create the business unit strategies. Then you cascade down to the business units. You have a strategic alignment conversation. Then you align the support units. So let me explain this. You have a corporate, you create a corporate strategy first. The cabinet leaders get together at a retreat. They identify a corporate plan. They bring the plan back to the organization. They align the colleges, the business units, the medical center research, and all those to it. So most of these people are cabinet leaders who actually developed the corporate strategy. So they was present when the strategy was developed. But then when you see the horizontal arrow that's going across, then they must have a horizontal alignment conversation. How do they support each other? What resources do they need to support each other? Then at the bottom, when you see the blue boxes, those are support units. Those are not customer facing units. The support units offer more of an SLA approach to strategy. So the colleges talk with HR and say, this is how you can support me. And this is the budget I have for you to support me. Business and finance go to compliance and all these areas and say, this is how you can support me. And this is the budget I have for you to help you support me. So you have to have those type of conversations. And then at the bottom, the support units have to talk to each other to see how they leverage enterprise-derived value from across each other to help deliver the outcomes of the business unit strategy and the corporate strategy. But then we have a top-down cascade where the business unit strategies create their strategies first. They develop their strategy based on their industry. They create competitive strategies against whoever their peers are in their industry. And they pilot these strategies for at least a year. The success that comes from those business unit strategy creates what we call the corporate strategy. Let me go back again. The success of these business unit strategies create the corporate strategy, meaning the corporate leadership team identify the key things that can drive performance at the corporate level from these business unit strategies. Then there is an alignment, horizontal alignment conversation, support units, and so forth. So it's almost the opposite. The first is the top down from the corporate creating a strategy and having everybody to align to it. The second is the business unit create the strategies. And then the corporate unit determine after a year of the business unit going through trial and error and learning from their strategy, build out a corporate strategy and then do the alignment. So as it relates to these two approaches, the one that gives you more of a buy-in is when the business unit build their strategies first and the corporate build its strategy second. This one gives you more of a buy-in when it comes to resistance from leaders within organization. So we're about to wrap up. So let me ask if anybody can hang on for at least another 5 minutes, because I got some quick things to go through that's critical to this strategy concept. So the alignment of the people, the information, and the organization. So now you have the business units, all of them have strategies that was cascaded from the corporate strategy. Now you have to align the people, the information, and the organizational capital to the actual business unit strategic plan. So the human capital are the people, the talent, skills, and knowledge that needs to be aligned to the business unit strategic plan. Information capital are the databases, information system, networks, and technology that needs to align. And then you have the organization capital, which is the culture, leadership alignment, needs to align to the actual strategic plan. So let's talk more about human capital for a second. So this diagram tells us how it works. The strategic vision, the change agenda, the strategic plan, you have the human capital readiness plan. So we have to create a human capital readiness plan that helps to develop the people. And as you can see, as it goes from there to develop people all the way back around to it actually giving us a return on invested human capital. It's a circle that we're trying to create, right? Again, you have to have the strategic vision, the change agenda, the strategic plan, the human capital readiness. These are the people attached to the strategy. That informs the development, which gives us a return on human capital development. So what does it look like? Back to the strategy map. So the core function that we look at when we build out human capital readiness plans is the internal process perspective. This is where you're constantly finding ways to improve the processes to deliver value to the customer, to get the customer outcome and get the outcome for the for the organization. Remember earlier we said to align the executive cabinet to the strategy, we focus on the outcomes perspective at the top, the financials. To align the people to the strategy, we focus on the internal process perspective, the initiative, the goals, everything that relates to the internal process perspective. Questions on this? So we take the internal process perspective, we build it out here. Then we align the people who do the work to where they do the work at. Does that make sense? Then we determine the competencies, the skills, the talent, and the attributes that they need to do the work. Then we assess them. So you see the first align HR with institutional strategy, we have 10 people, required number. The second, we have 50 people that needs to be assessed. The third one, we have 65 people that need to be assessed to do this work. And the fourth is 35 people that need to be assessed to do that work. Then we assess them and we get an outcome. So this tells us the readiness of our staff. The 10 that works on P1 are not ready to execute strategy. The 50 that works that aligns to P2 are ready to execute on the strategy. The 65 that works on P3 and P4 are 50% ready, and the 35 that works on that's aligned to P5 are 50% ready. We have to close that performance gap before we can execute on the strategy. We must close, we must use the StratX expenditure budget to put development dollars into these people to help them to execute on the strategy. Now I know this one is a lot on this slide, so give me some feedback on this one. Again, we only look at the internal process perspective on the strategy map. We pull those objectives over. We ask ourselves, what are the strategic job families that can help drive this specific strategic objective? What are the competencies that those people need to drive this specific objective? And let's assess them to see if they have those competencies. Basically, we get a readiness assessment score. And this helps us to execute. Here's the thing. What we find is that most organizations, I see it, Dr. See, most organizations have don't create readiness plans to actually do this work. Thus, the strategy fails because they align people. They don't even align the people to the strategy. They basically just push the strategy down in the organization. And because of it, the people tend to fail, the strategy tend to fail, or at the end of 5 years, we find out when we do an evaluation of strategy, only 10 to 15% of the strategy was ever executed because of this reason. Let me go one more slide, and then because we're at the end, we can follow up with anybody. I can with anybody on the call related to this information. So what do? We determine these actual competencies, we put them in a document, and we allow individual people in those areas who align to that specific strategic objective to give us feedback on, you see the key at the bottom, the E stands for can teach others, the W stands for well-rounded, and the L stands for limited. What we find out, we have them to put X's according to this ledger and this legend on this particular document, so we can see where they are as it relates to these things, because in order to achieve the P1 objective in the plan, they need to have all of these competencies. They need to be able to do all, these are skills that they need to be able to do. And then we get their manager on the other end. We have their manager to also assess them on those same things, so we can see the difference between how the manager see the individual and how the individual see him or herself. So we're at the end, by show of hand, if we can close out now, or we can give a couple more minutes before we close out. Julian, you there?
Yeah, I say we go a few more minutes.
Okay. So this is critical. This is human capital readiness. The bottom where you see readiness set, it comes from this actual assessment here. The red, green, yellow, the readiness score, and these competencies above it are like the competencies on this document, and it determines if we're ready to actually execute on the strategy. Now, if you have 5-10 people and 50% of them ready, and 50% are ready, and the five of the 10 are not ready, you still can execute. It's just we have to start developing the 5 that are not ready. So then we align a communication plan to the strategy. So now, after the strategy review meetings, we have to communicate, and everybody have to communicate the same message. Everybody have to communicate the same message. That means that the people that leave the strategy review meeting, as they communicate progress to the media, to legislators, to the governor, to politicians, to the organization, every cabinet leader has to be communicating the same message. That's why it's important to have a communication plan. And as you see here, how communication is effectively communicated down through the organization, you see that according to the ProSci assessment, it says that employees want to hear from their direct supervisor the progress of the plan, not from the executive leadership. What they want to hear from the executive leadership is, are we tracking towards the direction, the goals that we want to accomplish as an organization? But when it comes to the details of what's taking place with the strategy, they want to hear it directly from their supervisor. So when you build out the plan to set up a communication plan, you identify who the audience is that you're going to be communicating to. You draft the key messaging and the timing for who you're going to communicate. The message is different at the cabinet level, as cabinet leaders talk to local politicians, the governor, versus cabinet leaders talk to mid-level leadership who's talking to the employees. The conversations are different. So the messages need to be drafted differently. Determine the delivery messages that you're going to do. How do you plan to deliver it? And fourth, prepare to present to all these stakeholders. And this is what some of it look like. The project team, the functional managers, senior leaders, impacted area. How are you planning to, what's the message, what's the medium, who's the sender, and what's the frequency? You have to have that all aligned to effectively, consistently communicate the progress, to keep people engaged with the strategy. And then change. The whole change concept is, how do we mobilize the people? So now Julian and Marshall and LaShannon and Dr. Abby, when it comes to the mobilization, people will start resisting as we begin to push the strategy out. And people will start going in different directions, as you see on this diagram. The first thing when you first have a conversation is the initiation of the information. People will react a certain way when they first hear that there's a new strategy. You have to take them through a transition to get them to a future state. And to get them to that state, we have to have things aligned, such as executive sponsors. We have to have project manager, change manager, marketing, communication need to be aligned to the communication. And we have to be able to help the impacted people understand what's in it for me. So you're going to find this ebb and flow happening. You have to have a strong change manager to do this actual work, or it's not going to work. You have to have a strong change manager actually affect and move the strategy forward from a change process. We're still aligning. And if the change person is not effective and strong, what we have is what we see on the left. and not what we see on the right. So that means that people, fragmented sets of people, are going to make it to the future state, and you won't have your whole team. So that means you will have turnover. You will have a lot of resistance. You will have people trying to sabotage the strategy. You will have a lot of things because the change was not effective. The change strategies were not effective. So this is the outcome you get. And you wonder why your strategy is only 20, 30% executed. Is because you brought saboteurs over to the new world. And all they did the whole time the strategy was being executed was sabotage the strategy. So we're at the end. The last thing is the governance calendar. Once we identify all the strategic priorities across the strategy, we have to build out what we call a governance calendar. And the governance calendar identify when the meetings will take place and what will be talked about in those specific meetings. The strategy review meeting, the initiative portfolio, and the operation review meetings. And you have to identify them on the calendar, and you have to align all the executive leaders' calendars to these actual dates and the business unit calendars to these actual dates, so that we're having the right conversation at the right time with the right leaders. This document here is just basically what needs to be talked about in those specific meetings. You see across the top the legend, and you see these are things that needs to be talked about and how frequently those meetings need to be scheduled. From operation meetings to strategy review meetings and strategy refresh. The difference between a strategy review and a strategy refresh is a strategy refresh is a annual meeting. It's at the end of the year. And the goal of the strategy refresh is to pressure test the existing strategy to see if it's still relevant to the market. And based on pressure testing it, you do red line edits to the existing strategy and communicate those changes to the organization. A strategy refresh meeting is quarterly. You're looking at the progress of the strategy, and you're having conversation around, should we dial up or should we dial back? Those are the difference between the two meetings. And questions. I know it's a whole lot. I know it's a lot to consume. These hour and 30-minute meetings, I know that's a short time. I feel I can actually communicate this information. I know it's a whole lot, but that's why you always can reach out to me. You have my email, you have my number. We can talk through these things. But any questions? So any questions about the content from today?
Will the content be shared to the people who registered for the event?
Yes. So again, I do my emotional footprint at the end from a scale from -0 to 10 +10 as far as the content, the value of the information that was communicated. 2 words that describe it. How did you feel from the information, and what did you find interesting? Place that in the chat, please. This is how we use this to consistently improve on the trainings that we provide. I have a website that's under construction right now. Within a week, it should be ready, where all of the webinars and other self-paced on-demand trainings will be on, where you'll be able to go there and access that information. I will share that to everybody in the email list within maybe a week and a half, close to 2 weeks, where you have access to that. So in the chat, can you please place from scale -10 to +10, what do you think about the training, to 2 English word that describes it, and what did you find interesting?
So one of the comments here from Julian is reinforcement of strategy and discovery of new ideas. And on a scale from -10 to +10, it would be a solid 10.
Okay.
Same as Deirdre, 10 plus, very informative / useful.
Okay. Well, these are elements and books things that I have out there on Amazon as it relates to the content I shared today and other content. This is specifically alignment, but these are other elements. The third book you see, the Hermosa Mente Extragia, is not published yet. It will be published next month. It's basically a book of art that explains certain concepts that I share from an art perspective. And the bottom one, the Strategy Management Master Deck, is a card deck. If you follow each card, if you lay each card out on the table, that is the flow of strategy, how you develop strategy. Everything I just shared with you will be in the deck. You just follow the deck. One card, step 2, step 3, step 4. On the back is informational, how you do it. On the front is show you what it looks like. And then we have the All Things Strategic Club that we do on Mondays every other week. We talk about topics on there. The next webinar is March the 4th. It's Mastering Organization Ready. It's about how do you align culture to strategy.
There are a couple of more comments in the chat from Miles. It's a 10, informative, excellent. From Marsha. Doctor, I apologize, I didn't see the EST. We'll make sure to highlight that it's EST, but it's informative and looking forward to receiving the full training. It's a 10 plus. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So this is my contact information. So I will highlight that, Marshall, to make sure the the Eastern time. I'll make sure I highlight that in my post. So again, the next training is Mastering Organization Readiness, and there will be some trainings after that: Mastering Change Management, Mastering the Strategy Map. So I have all those up on Eventbrite by Monday of this upcoming Monday. So again, thank you all for all for participating. Hopefully this information was valuable. You can use it. Please send me an email or text to this particular number. I will be able to respond to you, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Always great to hear from you. Very good ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.